Happy to have you here with us today. And again, welcome to our program. My name is Carol Wilson. I'm the Lunder Education Chair at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And I am happy to welcome you today. I'll be your host of sorts for today's program. A reminder that this program will be recorded for viewing in the future. And it's also being closed captioned. So should you need to access those captions during today's program, you can just click on the CC button on your screen to enable those subtitles. And you can also adjust the font size if you'd like to see those larger. If you're having any trouble with that, just message in the chat, and our colleagues Joy and Jeff can assist you getting those on today.
Nope.
So thank you to Joy for doing those captions. I'd like to acknowledge the support for this program was given to us by our wonderful partners at the Smithsonian American Women's History Initiative. And because of her story, we are able to bring you these resources and this program. Today's program is one of two teacher programs for what we're calling a web duet. It has a nice musical ring to it, I think. And we'll offer a companion part 2 webinar on this topic in September, which I'll give you some more information about at the end of the program. But our goal with these two teacher professional development programs is really to celebrate the interdisciplinary brilliance of artist Alma Thomas and to amplify the voices of women trailblazers today. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So we're joined today by two experts and art historians as we dig into the life and work of Alma Thomas. So I'm going to introduce them in a little more in depth in a minute. But if you go to the next slide, Elizabeth, we'll just see the agenda for today. What we're going to do, there we go, thank you. So I'm going to just give a brief introduction, which I'm doing right now, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the works of Alma Thomas in the Smithsonian American Art Museum's collection. And I know many of you are probably really familiar with Alma Thomas's work, but for you and for others who may not be, I'll just show a few images so you can get a sense of what her paintings are like. And then I'll have a chance to introduce you to our two wonderful experts today, Jonathan Walz from the Columbia Museum of Art, and from the Baltimore Museum of Art. We're joined by Cynthia Hodge-Thorne, and I'll introduce them in a little more in depth in just a bit. But here's just a brief overview of how we'll spend our time today. So let's begin. Many of you are familiar with the work of Alma Thomas, who, just to frame her in time, lived from 1891 to 1978, the bulk of that time in our nation's capital. And she was a trailblazing artist, a pivotal figure in the Washington, D.C. art scene, and a singular figure, really, in the story of 20th century American art. She developed her colorful and exuberant and really unique form of abstract painting, which you see an example here on the right from our collection, Light Blue Nursery from 1968. She really developed that mature style later in life, beginning to paint seriously in 1960 after retiring from a 38-year career as an art teacher in DC public schools. One of the things I admire about her the most. And I think that will resonate with the many teachers joining us today. In those years, she'd really become to be regarded as a major painter in what was called the Washington Colorfield School. And she identified with other players of the day, artist Morris Lewis and Gene Davis, and other Washington Colorfield painters who were active in the DC area since the 1950s. And her work really explores the power of color and form in these luminous, contemplative, what came to be known as Alma's stripes, as you see here. They have this vibrant, rhythmic look to them that really transcended a lot of established art historical genres. She truly created a style that was uniquely her own. And she did it all at a deeply politicized moment in American life. And she was inspired, as she said many times, by nature and by the cosmos and by music. She stated that through color, I have sought to concentrate on beauty and happiness rather than on man's inhumanity to man. And as a Black woman artist, Thomas really broke barriers throughout her career. She was the first student to earn a fine arts degree from Howard University in 1924. She showed her work at the first Washington, D.C. art gallery to exhibit modern and abstract art, the first Black-owned and racially integrated local gallery, and her work was exhibited at the White House 3 times. She produced her most important works, as I mentioned, in the 8th decade of her life at the age of 81, really blossoming at that stage to become the artist that we know her for today. She was also the first African-American woman to have a solo exhibition at the Whitney Museum of American Art. So I just wanted to share a few visuals with you of examples of Thomas's mature work from the Smithsonian American Art Museum collection that exemplify some of the themes that preoccupied her throughout her work. So Elizabeth, if you could go to the next slide for me, please. Nature and horticulture is something that she had a great love of plants. She was often mesmerized by the holly tree and the crepe myrtles growing right outside the window of her DC home. You see on the left here, SAAM's Autumn Leaves Fluttering in the Breeze from 1973, which has those gorgeous autumnal colors. And on the right, you see Aquatic Gardens from 1973, also in our collection. She often visited gardens in DC, including Dumbarton Oaks and the Aquatic Gardens, as you see here. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. In addition to nature, she also was fascinated with music. She often listened to music as she painted. So some of her paintings and some of her nature paintings or nature-inspired paintings also have this rhythmic musical quality to them. On the left, you see Wind and Crepe Myrtle Concerto. So watching the gorgeous crepe myrtle out her window and seeing the way it moved in the wind really reminded her of this musical rhythm and a concerto. And on the right, you see White Roses Sing and Sing. I love this piece, which is punctuated by these beautiful yellow spots and squares throughout. It almost looks like a stone mosaic, and you can almost see those roses, those white roses popping and singing, again, bringing in those musical qualities. Next slide, please. One of, I have to say, my favorite paintings, and what it just seems to me almost a magnum opus here, another musical term, is her Red Azaleas singing and dancing rock and roll music. So here we see the perfect sort of three-part triptych ode to nature and to music. You can see those red azaleas, which are so prevalent in the DC area throughout our spring. And they sort of break up and seem to move across the canvas as they disseminate on the right-hand panel. Next slide, please. She was also fascinated by space and by the cosmos, and she was living and painting during a time in which we were advancing space exploration. So on the left, you see her Eclipse from 1970, and on the right, you see Snoopy Sees Earth, Wrapped in Sunset from 1970, both from SAAM's collection. And Cynthia will dig into a little bit more the influence of space and the cosmos on Alma Thomas's work. But right now, I really want to just, after that very brief overview, want to introduce our two speakers today. I'll start with Jonathan Walz. It's my pleasure to introduce him to you. Maybe you can start your video, Jonathan, so folks can see you. And I will give you a little bit, tell you a little bit about him. He is going to tell us a little bit about framing her life and biography for us today as we dig into this. Jonathan is the Director of Curatorial Affairs and the Curator of American Art at the Columbus Museum in Columbus, Georgia, which coincidentally is also Alma Thomas's hometown. And I think we had someone in the chat who's from Columbus as well, maybe a couple of people, so welcome. Jonathan is an expert on American modernism who earned both his MA and PhD in art history from the University of Maryland College Park, where he also spent time at the David C. Driscoll Center as one of 6 graduate student curators for the exhibition Embodied: Black Identities in American Art from the Yale University Art Gallery. He's published essays and given lectures on a range of topics from Charles Demuth and Alma Thomas to conceptual portraiture and queer rurality. As a proponent of object-based study and public history, he has over 25 years experience in art museums, including more than a decade of service at the National Gallery of Art in Washington. And fortuitously for us, on the topic we're discussing today, he's the co-curator of the current traveling exhibition, Alma W. Thomas, Everything is Beautiful. As such, she's an expert in all things Alma Thomas and the perfect person to frame her life and biography for us today. So welcome, Jonathan, and welcome to your cat also. I think you're on mute. Just if you want to unmute, we can hear you.
There we go. Thanks for having me and my special guest speaker who might poke his head in. His name is Wolfie, and we were talking before the session started that Alma Thomas herself actually had a pet cat and also a parakeet. So she was an animal lover and also visited the National Zoo quite often as she lived not too far away. My task is to really build on the introduction to Alma Thomas that Carol got started for us. And I wanted to show this timeline in its entirety because I wanted to emphasize how long her life was and how many kinds of different aspects of modernism she lived through. She often talked about how she grew up in the horse and buggy days, and then at the end of her life was fascinated with space travel and somehow found herself at the Whitney Museum of American Art at 80 years old and couldn't really have imagined that as a child. And so she's really expressing kind of profound gratitude and sort of wonder at how her life has turned out. There have been a few museum retrospectives prior to the one that I've helped co-curate that's getting ready to open at the Columbus Museum as we speak. And these other exhibitions, following pretty much the artist's kind of desire, really focused on her career from around 1960 forward. And so those last 18 years of her life were when she produced the kinds of paintings that Carol showed us examples of. She innovates what she calls Alma's stripes in 1965, 1966, and first exhibits them at a solo show at Howard University in 1966. It is kind of a very easy sort of breaking point to point out. But what we wanted to do with the current exhibition is really talk about all of the things that happened before 1966, as well as some aspects of her life after 1966. So we really wanted to build on these previous exhibitions and really take her, make her relatable, show how much subtlety and nuance her life encompassed, how complex it was, and really then demonstrate how all of these things in her early life really add up to her classic style in the 60s and 70s. So I'll enlarge this a bit. She's born here in Columbus in 1891. Her parents were part of a burgeoning middle class of African Americans in the region at the time. And so she is born into some privilege, although race held the family back in certain regards. They had also attained a certain amount of financial stability that was unusual for other African Americans living at the time. So for example, Thomas did not have to work as a child as many of her peers at the same age likely had to do. She really, this is a formative experience, this modicum of privilege that she possesses, and she holds on to it and defends it fiercely throughout the rest of her life. She is about 15 when the family moves to Washington, D.C., and they do that in 1907. Partly, there's several reasons why. One is that the school system in Columbus at the time only went to 9th grade for Black residents. And so the family, with their understanding of how important education was and what a door it is to an individual to a better future, they realized they needed to move somewhere where the education system for Blacks went all the way through 12th grade and maybe even offered other opportunities beyond that. So they moved because of education reasons. There's also a lot of racial violence that is happening at the time. Georgia, at this moment, is really leading the country in the number of lynchings, and the 1907 Atlanta massacre, in which Alma's uncle was sequestered for his own safety. He worked in Atlanta, and so there was a very personal connection to that event. Both of those, the education system and the increasing racial violence, really contributed to the family's decision to move to Washington. I just want to point out, though, that 15 years of her life spent here is about 1/5 of her total life. And so that's not insignificant. And we really hope in the exhibition to show how a lot of her childhood experiences really thread through the rest of her life. And that while she doesn't really often return to the Deep South, she does refer to it in memory and draw on it as a source for her art. She gets teacher certification and works in Delaware at a settlement house for about 6 years. And then in 1921, she decides that she wants to go to Howard University and to study costume design. She's very interested in theater throughout her life. And so in very typical Alma Thomas fashion, she does everything backwards and upside down. And so, you know, most folks who have the opportunity to go to college when they're 18, 19, 20 years old, Alma is starting when she's 30. At Howard. She did start as a junior, I believe, because of the teacher credits that she had already earned. But it just kind of reinforces to me as an art historian that her love of young people and helping others was just reinforced by her attendance at college at such a older than the other students that would have predominantly been around her. She graduates in 1924, and she's the first fine arts graduate of that year and ever, because she decided to join the fledgling department, which had only been founded the year that she joined Howard. And so she bears the distinction of being the first African-American student from this particular program at Howard, which is makes her kind of a trailblazer and touchstone for future artists that go through the program. After Howard, she begins a 35-year career teaching at Shaw Junior High School. And I know you all know high school, junior high school students way better than I do, and how there's so much going on at that particular age that I think should be canonized as a saint for sticking it out with that age group for so long. And she becomes really a beloved teacher and mentor, and many of her students remain in touch with her throughout their lives, even after they graduate. And the exhibition includes, the one that we have put together includes some student work from former students who went on to have rather successful cultural careers themselves. While she's teaching, so teaching junior high during the day through the academic year, and then in the 30s, she starts during the summer attending classes at Teachers College at Columbia University, and she eventually earns her master's degree in 1934. Her thesis project is fairly interesting in the fact that it's correlative a very John Deweyan idea of student-directed projects and also really interdisciplinary projects. So the kind of core around which she built her thesis was this idea that you could use a performance and the production of the performance and all of the prep work needed for the performance as this way to get students to learn about math and anatomy and electrical engineering and the history of theater. And so in 1933, 1934, she works with students who are learning all of these things, color theory, lighting, how to build a stage, and the end goal is at the end of the year when they produce the play Alice in Wonderland with marionettes. She remains interested in marionettes through the 30s, and then in the 1940s, she joins a painting group of peers who get together after work and are associated with the Washington artist Louise Mailou Jones. And she is part of this group that participated in sessions where live models were made available or still lifes were set up. And then the group would critique each other's work, and they also organized exhibitions. So in the mid 40s, this is after her parents have passed away, I believe, and World War II is over. So she is really kind of realizing she's middle-aged, she needs to kind of focus on what she wants to do with the rest of her life. And so she decides that she's going to concentrate on painting. So those classes in the 40s are really the beginning of more lifelong learning for her, because once the group sort of disbands in the early 1950s, she decides to keep going, and she wants to investigate abstraction, which the group had not really promoted. They were much more about observable reality, painting what they saw in front of them. And so Thomas, again, she's still teaching in the classroom and at night and on the weekends, going to American University starting in 1952. For 5 years, she studies painting and art history. And really, this is what unlocks for her how to put an abstract painting together. And really, she's part of a larger conversation that's going on in Washington, D.C. at the time. So she's not necessarily an outlier. But one thing we really wanted to emphasize in the show is that while there were all of these artists around her, because of her age and because of her involvement with the organization called the Barnett Aiden Gallery, where many of the artists that went on to become even more famous that Carol mentioned, Gene Davis, Morris Lewis, Kenneth Noland, they got their start at the Barnett Aiden Gallery, which Alma Thomas helped run. So there's really this very vibrant, rich arts community in DC in the 40s and 50s that yields its fruit then in the 60s and 70s when these artists all kind of come to the attention of the larger art world, primarily through the critic Clement Greenberg. She retires in 1960, though we like to say that she retired from formal classroom teaching because she really never stops teaching. Even after retiring from the DC public school system, she gets students together in her home, through her church, through local service organizations. So she really never, I think she just couldn't help herself. She was such a natural born teacher and loved students and youth so much that she really wanted to make their lives better. And she thought that that could happen. One way that could happen was through art and art making and learning about Western civilization and all of the great cultural achievements that all kinds of artists and writers and dramatists had achieved in the past. once she retires, she is very much engaged in working on abstract paintings. But in 1964, she suffers a really, really debilitating bout of arthritis. And it's so bad that she's bedridden and she thinks that she'll never be able to walk or really paint, work in the studio ever again. However, she receives an invitation in 1965, basically saying that she could have a solo show at Howard University Art Gallery in 1966 if she wants to, but she had originally thought she wanted to do it in 1968, but they moved the date up on her. And so she kind of, through, I think, sheer force of will, really taking the arthritis into account, but also wanting to work towards this goal of this exhibition in 1966, comes up with this completely new way of making paintings for her, which is, again, what we've heard about several times now, called Alma Stripes. And so it's really this show in 1966 when she debuts that broken brush mark, which basically becomes kind of her signature style. So that happens in 1966. That's really, to be honest, the where her career starts to take off. The show itself, outside of the Black arts community in DC, didn't receive that much attention, but I think the professional experience of that show and the events around it really gave her a sense of confidence that she had been lacking. And so it's after that point that she really, really makes a special point to start showing her work professionally. She gets a gallery show in DC in 1970 with a very prominent gallerist, Franz Bader. And these, it sort of is like dominoes, because each of these shows sort of inspires someone else who sees that first show to then create and curate another show after it. So in 1971, David Driscoll, who himself is an amazing artist educator and was a student at Howard when he met Alma Thomas through the Barnett Aiden Gallery and the Howard University Art Gallery, and they become lifelong friends. And at this point in his career in the 60s, he becomes the chair of the art department at Fisk University and is also director of the gallery there. And so he offers her a show at Fisk in 1971. She had no idea what was going to come. And I think in her mind, this was going to be like the best, highest point that she was ever going to attain in her career. I mean, Fisk is an amazing HBCU with a long history. The art department was founded by Aaron Douglas. So there's all of these reasons why this show was incredibly important. And in fact, it takes place and it's very large. And she actually sells a lot of work out of the show to folks in Nashville, which is really interesting. But that show leads to her kind of true breakthrough, I guess, what she called her banner year of 1972, when she's offered a solo show at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York. And she will, because she accepts, she becomes the first African-American woman to receive that sort of attention and approbation. The show is the result, we talk about this in the exhibition, of protests that had been going on from the late 60s into the early 70s, where the Black arts community was really pressing and making demands for change in the art world in general, but specifically in the museum world of New York City. So protests were happening outside the Met, outside the Whitney, outside the Guggenheim, outside MoMA, where these activist groups were really putting pressure on these institutions to include African-American art in the collection, hire Black staff, and curate shows of African-American material. And so these protests are what led the Whitney to start this series of solo projects for which she received the fifth slot. She continues to paint, though her health, she breaks her hip in 1974, and her health really, she never really kind of bounces back very robustly. And so she continues to paint, however, and takes both her arthritis and this previously broken hip, like she's working with a walker, but doesn't really let it deter her from producing more of these kind of classic paintings that we know. And it's in 1976, just about a year and a half before she passes away, that she creates that monumental triptych that Carol showed us. It is also one of my favorite of her paintings. It's 13 feet wide. And if you consider that she was 5'1" and dealing with chronic pain and mobility issues, it's an amazing achievement from a physical standpoint, but it's also just such an amazing achievement in terms of what she was able to accomplish, what she contributed to art history. And that work really became the touchstone for our exhibition, because as Carol sort of alluded, it really brings so many themes of the exhibition and her life together. Her love of nature and gardens, music and performance, self-actualization, which was a buzzword at the time. She's really working within the Washington Color School tradition at that point, and she's so knowledgeable about art history that she's really drawing on lots of sources in that painting as well. Really, after her show at Martha Jackson West in 1976, her health really begins to decline much more dramatically, and she spends quite a bit of time in the late 70s shoring up her legacy. And it's thanks to her foresightedness that Smithsonian American Art Museum, for example, has 30 of her paintings, and many of the museums in Washington also own her work. It was very strategic on her part. She realized that the most important artists always have their work end up in a collection, a museum, and so she knew that to receive staying power, she was going to have to get her work into museums, which she accomplished. Not surprising how determined she was. And she passes away in 1978, early in the year, from heart surgery that she was going to die from the heart ailment in one way or the other. So she went into the surgery knowing that she had kind of a 50-50 chance, but if she didn't have the surgery, she was going to pass away from the ailment anyway. So she decided to take her chances, and unfortunately didn't make it. But her life is so complex, and I think as much as the paintings themselves are engaging and attractive, I think once people really know a lot more about her backstory, I think they just become really almost obsessed with her as a person. She becomes this kind of very symbolic kind of triumph over ableism and provincialism and misogyny and racism in a way that other artists from the time really don't attain that kind of level. I will stop and I will turn things over to Cynthia.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was incredibly fascinating, and I'm so thankful. It's just as you're describing it, it's so incredible to think of what she was able to overcome, especially due to her debilitating arthritis, how that changed her art and the way she painted. As someone noted in the chat, this really incredible story of perseverance over chronic pain and lack of mobility is inspirational, and also fascinating to learn about her place in the movement for change in the art world in New York.
Yeah. She, one thing I just want to mention, because it has a Smithsonian connection, is also about STEAM, is that our colleagues at the Smithsonian Conservation Center did a technical study in conjunction kind of with the exhibition that my co-curator and I put together. And we learned so much about what scientific findings they made about her practice. And so one of them is really, in my mind, not so much how she overcame her arthritis, but how she incorporated her arthritis into her practice. And so it wasn't this thing that she was trying to deny or get rid of, but really she's like, I've got to deal with it. I might as well like make it work for me. And she really does.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I love that STEAM connection. Thank you for bringing that up.
Oh yes, and that's such a great resource, and yeah, really the seed of the show that Carol will tell you a little bit more about later too.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you again. It's a good segue to talking about science, I think. And we'll move on now to introduce Cynthia Hodge-Thorne, our second presenter. Cynthia, if you want to turn your camera on so we can see you, hopefully we can see you. It's my pleasure to, there you are, hello. It's my pleasure to introduce you all to Cynthia Hodge-Thorne, who is the inaugural recipient of the Robert E. Meyerhoff and Rita Becker Curatorial Fellowship at the Baltimore Museum of Art, which was established in concert with that museum's first biennial commission, Alma Thomas, A Moment's Pleasure. In her role at the BMA, Cynthia is involved with all aspects of realization and programming of that Alma Thomas exhibition, as well as other contemporary exhibitions at the museum. She earned her MA in art history from American University after graduating from Howard University herself in Washington, D.C., Alma Thomas's alma mater as well, as we've learned. And with a BA in art history from Howard, Cynthia has worked as a fellow for the Alper Institute for Washington Art at American University's Katzen Center here in DC. And she's also worked on projects with the Washington Project for the Arts, the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities, and Howard University. So she's going to help us understand Thomas's exploration of space and how she came to be inspired, especially in regards to the social challenges of the time in which she was painting. So over to you, Cynthia.
Okay, I'm gonna start share my screen. I'm gonna apologize first.
No worries. And while you're doing that, I'll just remind people, if you have questions for Jonathan and or Cynthia, to just put them in the Q&A in your webinar, just so we'll keep those going. So over to you. Thank you, Cynthia.
All right, so I'm gonna talk to you guys about the Alma Thomas Space Series. Also, if you hear my dog barking, I apologize beforehand. Just gone a little bit nuts today. So the Alma Thomas space paintings were a series of about a dozen or so paintings that the artist created between the years of 1969 and 1973. So this about 4-year span or so. And these were inspired by the United States space program. This is one of the only times in Thomas's career that she paints a specific, clearly identifiable subject matter and strays away from her nature theme works. So this is clearly tied to the United States space program during a very, very specific time in the United States culture and history. And before you get to the space paintings, it's just important to understand what she did before. So the nature works and how she left nature. So she's most well known for her nature themed paintings, or earthworks as she sometimes called them, which I think Carol kind of discussed a little bit earlier. So these were paintings of an abstract style with bold and very colorful palettes, the unique brushstrokes, the Alma stripes, and specifically titles relating to flowers, seasons, and other natural elements. And the landscapes evoke this universal beauty of nature, which is really important to Thomas. She wanted to generalize the experience in order to really posit nature as an escape from the outside world. She found nature to be a relief from the evils that she and other African Americans were faced with during this time period, specifically segregation and violence. So Thomas pointedly portrayed nature to convey this message about pain in nature and not the outside world from which the problems in society really resided. So she described her motivation for creating art specifically as, quote, wanting to paint the beauty of the world instead of man's suffering with man suffering referring to the economic struggles and specifically racial struggles like segregation that was prevalent during this time. However, in 1969, with no like clear explanation, she stopped titling her works with references to the natural phenomenon. Nature didn't change, trees outside Thomas's window didn't change, which she really drew information from. But her interest at this point changed, and nature as a subject matter no longer served Thomas the way it did previously. Nature itself had become this sort of politicized site, so it can no longer serve as a reprieve from politics for her. So during this time, in the 1960s, we have the rise of the environmentalism movement, which focuses attention on pollution, and it actually successfully pressured Congress to pass measures to promote cleaner air and water. And during this time, we get books such as Rachel Carlson's 1962 Silent Spring, which was an environmental science book that spearheaded the environmental movement and its condemnation of pesticides and their harmful effects on the environment and wildlife. Also during this time, artists started using the earth as a canvas, so really tapping into this environmentalism movement and shifting their focus into land specifically. So you get artists creating works such as Richard Long's 1967 work, A Line Made by Walking, which is one of the kind of most notable land artworks. And this is created by physically and literally walking and making a mark in nature by walking just back and forth in a line. He did this for weeks. And this work further comments on the ways in which humans use and abuse nature. It just represents the way human activity has just literally marked Earth. So at this point, with Silent Spring, with the rise in land art, and just with the rise in the environmentalism movement, nature was just no longer reprieved from the issues of society the way that it had previously been for Thomas. And now it's just become an irrefutable reflection of the politicization of nature. So at the height of society's new focus on nature, Thomas stops titling her works after the natural phenomenon and starts titling them after cosmic ones. So this is when we start to move into our solar and space focus with works like Lunar Rendezvous, Circle of Flowers. So this paintings, and as you can see with Spring Delightful Flower Bed, they're still very closely related. They still look very much the same. It's just their titles are different. And the lunar rendezvous that she's referencing in this is the moon landing. So after nearly a decade of preparation and a bunch of failed attempts, on July 21st, 1969, NASA successfully brings a man to the moon, and Neil Armstrong becomes the first man to, step on a moon surface. And the vision of space Thomas provides in Lunar Rendezvous, Circle of Flowers is a reaction to the success of the Apollo 11 mission and the inspiration that it provided many Americans. And this shift away from nature represented in this work marks the beginning of Thomas's rejection of the natural world and just shows that she's slowly moving away from Earth to the possibilities awarded in outer space. Now, space, from the way that NASA presented, from the images, the videos, and like everything that was presented and published to the public, was shown to be this new frontier. It's a new land to conquer specifically. That's kind of like the idea that was floating around. And NASA's success in space exploration suggested that anything could be possible. But the appeal of space was also due not only that anything could be possible from these wild technological advances, but also that the American ideals and cultures would be continued in this new world. That was a huge focus of the space race at the time. And the first image of the Earth from the moon came from 1966, the Lunar Orbiter. And there's a robot monitored by NASA. And you can see the Earth covered in like all these shadows. The top half is seen, but the bottom part is just completely covered in darkness. And you see the craters on the moon surface. So the entire world was able to see and experience this view of Earth. And also you get to see and experience this view of the moon and take from it just a new understanding of the universe beyond their own planet. And not only that, but also just take with it just a new understanding of themselves within the Earth, like seeing it this small and this obscured. It really kind of changed things for a lot of people. And these pictures were very popular and also very, very highly visible on TV and published throughout various newspapers in the world. And photos of the moon, as you can see, were just shown as like this very abstract and foreign object, which was often described by NASA as a vast and lonely forbidden sight. And the abstract and scientific interpretations of the moon from these photos highlighted and emphasized NASA, and by extension, America's ingenuity. It also demonstrated the success and just like the limitless opportunities by the technological advances of the time, which you get with the Atlas 6 launch image. Atlas 6 mission was the first American orbital spaceflight. It was piloted by astronaut John Glenn Jr. In February of 1962. So the photos of space, not only from the moon, but also from these rocket launches, celebrated this new domain and the amazing technological feats that helped in the process of seeing this new domain, while also demonstrating the need for further exploration and discovery of outer space. And then we get to Mars. And this is actually one of my favorite Alma Thomas paintings. So the Mariner 4 Mars image that we get in 1962 also contributes to this effort of examination and discovery in outer space. This was the first spacecraft to successfully complete a flyby of Mars, and it brought back images of Mars. These, which were very influential and very powerful. They're very, very helpful because it's our first time seeing a neighboring planet, but they also brought way more questions than they answered. Because the planet was obscured and disjointed with all these craters filling the surface of Mars that was only very partly visible. So it brought a lot of information, but also a lot more questions. And Alma Thomas, while inspired by the journeys of NASA and the images that they produce, she offers an extremely subjective vision of space herself. She uses a much bolder color palette, which from black and white to the pinks and purples you can see. So it's a very, very bold color palette. The fragmented Alma stripes that you see visualize the experimentation that the cosmic subject matter really afforded her in this. And specifically in Glimpse of Mars, the pinks and red colors set her view apart from the way it was actually shown in public. Thomas's portrayal of Mars with these unblended colors on the bright white canvas, and if you guys get a chance to see it in person, it's actually really amazing. It's not a particularly large painting, but it is kind of substantial. And just the way that she orients the paler colors in between the darker colors really shows the relationship between them and offers a view of the planet that Thomas she had to imagine this and had to kind of create this view of something that she did not know before. So she creates this passionate and lively example of the planet Mars that we can't know to be true especially at this time. And rather than being bounded by the realities of nature, space really gave Thomas this ultimate freedom to experiment in her colors. And in the abstraction that she uses, the space series departs not only from the images of space that NASA were being published and circulated, but also from other images of space that artists at the time were creating. And it really just gives her this opportunity to create a whole new world for her. Now, other artists during this time were creating images of space. NASA had its own space art program where they hired artists to come in and paint images of space, paint images of their rocket launches, paint a lot of different things that had to do with the NASA space program. And there were artists outside of that. Alma Thomas is one of the artists that was not included in the space program, but she also was kind of just a side feature. She was still there. And you had other artists such as filmmakers like Stanley Kubrick, who used this moment to really create new ideas about what space could bring us and what opportunities were awarded in space, which you see in his 2001 film, 2001 A Space Odyssey, which pushed boundaries in depicting the creative potential of space and significantly helped shape the entire genre of science fiction. It's actually regarded as one of the most significant films in history. It's one of the best science fiction films. It's really kind of interesting. I'd recommend people watch it if they can, or if they haven't already. So the film's impact really comes from its imaginative depiction of space and the way it pictured the relationship between humans and technology. And arguably the most remarkable scene in the movie is the Stargate sequence, which you can kind of see the clips of on the side here, which portrays the main character, David Bowman, transitioning through multiple dimensions and times. And it leads to his transformation from the beginning where he's a middle-aged captain to the end where he just transforms into an elderly man. So he goes through a bit of time travel. And the scene, while often being described as psychedelic, is just visually comparable to the images of space that Thomas was creating at the time. And for Kubrick, space really enabled him to imagine an alternate world and experiment in ways that representations of Earth precluded. So he's going at it the same way that Alma Thomas is. It's also just really significant to note that Thomas, while painting the space series, not only had a record player playing the soundtrack of 2001: A Space Odyssey while she painted, but she also had sounds from a National Geographic record called Sounds of Space Age from Sputnik to Lunar Landing. So she was actually listening to lunar landings and the 2001: Space Odyssey soundtrack while she painted. And it really fed her fascination with space exploration and her imagination of space. She actually wanted these sounds to be kind of played throughout some of her exhibitions. It's just kind of unfortunate it didn't always work out like that, but this is something that she wanted to kind of have her visitors listening to while they went through and saw her work. And we have other examples of artists using space as inspiration and space exploration as a source, a theme in their work, which you really get with Black science fiction authors. And I thought this was interesting because they really focus on envisioning a post-racial world. And these authors use space as a site for navigating social, gender, and racial concerns and ideologies. And they posit space as a site of escape, which kind of is similar to what Alma Thomas is doing, specifically with nature, where she uses that escape from society. And then now she's moving to space and following in the same pattern of these Afrofuturistic authors. She's using space as a site of escape from the issues of society. Now, the Afrofuturists were optimistic in their world building, which is also very similar to Thomas. However, you get artists and authors such as, Sun Ra, and his film Space is the Place, which demonstrates the possibility of outer space as a site of Black liberation from racial issues in current society. However, for him, space is a slightly Black only utopia, whereas with Thomas, it's free and open to all. So space really at this time is being taken and used as a site for not only exploration and experimentation, but also as a site of Black liberation through intergalactic travel. Now, Sun Ra, Stanley Kubrick, Alma Thomas, they all really take influence from the innovations, not only of the Apollo program, but the entire NASA program itself, and the creations of their new world, really paying homage to the advancements that led to their new world, and more importantly, acknowledging the potential for liberation and freedom, both creatively and socially, that is offered in outer space. For Kubrick and Thomas, space enabled them to imagine an alternate world and experiment in ways that representations of Earth precluded. And while space is a Black only utopia for Sun Ra, Thomas's vision of space, again, is a free utopia, and with aspirations for a better and more perfect society, which was really a response to her own. Now, to really put things in perspective, timeline-wise, kind of taking cue from Jonathan earlier with his timeline, during this time, we have the space program. So you have things such as astronaut Ed White's Gemini 4 mission, which became like the first American astronaut to walk in space, and that was in 1965, June 3rd. A few months later, we're hit with the Watts riots, which was a massive, massive event in terms of civil rights and Black liberation during the 1960s. It's one of the deadliest riots in United States history, and it demonstrated the inequality and poverty and brutality that many communities, not only the Watts community, but also other Black communities were experiencing. And it really kind of shifted a lot of the attention away from the NASA space program, especially in the public eye during this time. And while Thomas's space paintings may not be depictions of the civil rights movement and social struggles of the time, she really avoided painting anything really related to that. They do represent her response to the world around her and her response to the issues going around as an African-American woman during this turbulent time in our history. And Thomas turned to space instead of very real and powerful civil rights events, such as the Watts riots or any of the other civil rights events of the 1960s. She did this in hopes of finding and perhaps even creating a new utopia. So she looks to space in order to kind of find a place that solves the issues that she was seeing in her life and around her in Washington, D.C. And she depicts this world with like limitless opportunities in space through her abstraction. And living in 1960s Washington, D.C., she's obviously aware of all the racial and economic and international problems affecting Americans at this time, specifically people of color. And she saw space, again, as like this alternative tool. So for her, space was a springboard for pictorial experimentation. She doesn't take the images of space that were being offered at the time and just completely goes for that. She uses that and kind of pivots and creates her own vision that she thinks is open to all and can solve the problems that we are experiencing on Earth, while also kind of being a advancement from the space that she was being shown. So Thomas's space series, it became very popular. As Jonathan mentioned, she sold a lot of these. She did pretty well with them. And it was very popular at the time just for the new world and just the advancements that it represented. It differs quite dramatically from other works produced during this time, not only from space, but other works produced by African-American artists. And these images of space that were being circulated, not only by other artists, but by NASA, point to a world that she was really trying to open up for African-Americans. And she saw this as a way to do so. So this is kind of her experimentation. And in this way, it gave her the opportunity to create this new world, because for Thomas, space was an arena of experimentation in which anything she imagined, both in art and in society, really could be made real. And I want to end on a quote, and I think Jonathan hinted at it earlier. It really summarizes her interest in space a lot more graciously and gracefully than I have in the last 15 minutes. So she says, "I was born at the end of the 19th century, horse and buggy days, and experienced the phenomenal changes of the 20th century machine and space age. Today, not only can our great scientists send astronauts to and from the moon to photograph its surface and bring back samples of rocks and other materials, but through the medium of colored television, all can actually see and experience the thrill of these adventures. These phenomena set my creativity in motion." So, yeah, that's her space series.
Fantastic. Wow. Thank you, Cynthia. That was incredible. I love that you ended with Sam's gorgeous celestial fantasy. Another one of my favorites. Yeah, just learning that she listened to 2001: A Space Odyssey and Sounds of Space Age while she was painting. Those are fabulous, also great primary resources that teachers could use to let students listen to and hear Alma's inspiration. And I just love the way you frame that in terms of how she was looking to space as sort of a new utopia with limitless opportunities, as a way to transcend issues that society was facing. And what you said it so beautifully, what you imagine in art can be made real in society. And isn't that a wonderful metaphor and a place to end today for how we can be inspired and continue to have her work inspire us in our lives, and how relevant that is. So thank you so much again. And thank you, Jonathan, for your presentation and for whetting our appetites about all things Alma Thomas, and for deepening our understanding about her life and her inspirations and her incredible career as an artist and teacher and trailblazer. I know there's some questions from our audience members, and there've been lots of curiosity in the chat and the Q&A. So I wonder if Phoebe and Jeff, do we have time for a couple of questions? Maybe you can pull out a few from the chat and just let us know what people are thinking about.
Sure. If people can stay on for a couple more minutes, there are some great questions in the chat. There are a couple that relate to Thomas's influences and connections in the world. Carrie asked about the influences of her background in theater and costume design and her interest in puppet making and marionettes on her art. And Carolyn also asked about whether she had any interaction with Harlem Renaissance creatives. So I wanted to kind of pose both of those questions and see if Jonathan or Cynthia, there was anything you wanted to respond to there.
I'll jump in. She is studying at Columbia University in the 30s. And so the Harlem Renaissance kind of people think of it as the 20s, but it really just keeps going, right? So when she's there in the 30s, there's a really great biographical statement where she talks about how her mother, who was a dressmaker, had made these amazing clothes for her, and that she would walk up and down the avenue with all of these other folks who were kind of seeing and being seen. And what I love about it too is she talks about how that it's the first time maybe that she sees such a large amount of African Americans like outside and enjoying themselves. Like for her, it's kind of like it blows her mind that this is actually happening. So I have a feeling she might have met Langston Hughes, who was in and around Howard for a hot minute when she was in DC. I have a feeling, although she doesn't specifically say it, but Augusta Savage had a studio workshop gallery space in Harlem. Thomas is staying at the YWCA when she's there. That is really right around the corner from where Augusta Savage was and the branch of the public library that's there. And, you know, Columbia's in Upper West Side, so she's also has access to Columbia as well in this very kind of central location in Harlem. I have a feeling she couldn't have escaped meeting Augusta Savage. I don't know why she doesn't talk about it, but we don't really have anything to point to. But it seems to me like meeting this kind of other teacher and practicing artist would have been important to her. The second question was about, through the Barnett Aiden Gallery, I'll just finish with this, that she did meet other working African-American artists. So for example, the Barnett Aiden Gallery would bring work from New York, from other New York galleries to Washington. And so I'm fairly confident that she met Romare Bearden, and you know, her network was so extensive that I can't imagine she at least didn't know who these other artists were and how she like kind of fit into the constellation of Black art at the time.
Thank you, Jonathan. We actually will do one more question, and this is a perfect question for you, Cynthia. Edmund was wondering how her space works received by her Black art peers. Thinking of 1970, Jill Scott Heron, Whitney on the Moon.
Yeah. So I think it kind of goes a lot back to what Jonathan said about her huge network of Black artists with the Barnett Art Gallery. She was friends with a lot of these people, and they had their artwork and she had her artwork, and it was just understood that this is their artwork and this is her artwork. Because she was close friends with David Driscoll, who was a huge figure at this time, and he was so supportive of her artwork. And when she went into different communities, I talk a lot, sorry, in my thesis, I kind of talk a lot about how she displayed these artworks in institutions of Black spaces and white spaces, and how it was received in those Black spaces. Specifically, she would display them in HBCUs, so historically Black universities and colleges, to a very diverse and educated Black audience who were very accepting of these space paintings and very accepting of the message that she was trying to provide with her space paintings. So while there were artists who were painting very explicitly political messages that related to not only the civil rights movement, but also the kind of discomfort that a lot of African Americans had with the attention on space while they were dealing with such violent and personal racial issues, that I think it was still very like widely accepted that like you could still have political messages, and also you could have this like hope for a better world that was not as like explicit as some of the other artists might have created. But she still showed like with a lot of them at the same time. Like she was still in group shows with Barbara Chase Rabaud, who was presenting some of her Malcolm X monuments, and she still showed with a lot of these artists. So it was kind of widely received that they would do their thing and she would do her thing. That makes sense.
That's great. I love it. Thank you. Thank you, Cynthia, for that, and Jonathan for answering those questions. I know there may be more questions, as you both inspired a lot of curiosity and wonder about among our participants today. A lot of activity in the chat, but in the interest of time, I think I'll try to bring us to a close. The good news is, though, for everybody, that if you want more Alma Thomas and you're looking for ways to engage your students with her work, we've got you covered. Elizabeth, maybe you can share the next slide there. Yes, thank you. This is just a little preview, a sneak peek, if you will, of the upcoming suite of lesson plans and resources linking various aspects of Thomas's art to multiple content areas across the curriculum, from examining nature and building those good scientific observation, evidence gathering, iterating problem-solving skills in science, to looking at mood, style, and rhythm, and reading artworks for musical inspiration, to even using artworks as inspiration for writing and comparison and examining parts of speech in the ELA classroom. So all of these lessons are connected to standards, and they're being reviewed and tested in classrooms by 10 teachers across the country, some of whom may be on this program with us today. So a huge shout out and thank you to all our teacher partners. So we're looking forward to unveiling those lessons to you all in the fall after our second webinar in the Web Duet series on Alma Thomas. And speaking of that, if you'll go to the next slide for me, thank you. I want to just put a plug in for you to save the date for our next teacher webinar on September 13th, which will feature 2 female trailblazers in their own right. We'll be joined by Janelle Wellens, who's an aerospace engineer and who has worked at the famed Jet Propulsion Lab at NASA, and the amazing public horticulturist Abra Lee, who will engage with us around this question of what insights can art can we gain from women in science, and dig a little more deeply and hear from these 2 trailblazers. So save the date again, September 13th. My colleague Anne will share in the chat a link for you to sign up for that second webinar, and she'll also share a link to an additional resources Google Doc that supplements our discussion today, which has a lot of the things that Cynthia and Jonathan talked about. And we'll also share a link to a survey form that we'll ask you to fill out to give us some feedback on our program today. Let us know what you liked and how we can improve for next time. And we'll also send all of this out to you tomorrow via email. If you registered for this program through the Eventbrite link and we have your email, we'll send this to you. If you're part of our summer sessions for teachers, we'll upload some of this information to the edX platform, and you'll be able to access them within the next day or 2. And also, just a reminder to save the date to visit SAAM. If you are in Washington, D.C., come to the Smithsonian American Art Museum for our upcoming exhibition, Alma Thomas Composing with Color, which will open at SAAM in October 2023. A great companion for Jonathan's fantastic exhibition. With that, I think we'll close out. And again, a huge thank you to Cynthia and to Jonathan and all of our SAAM crew behind the scenes who are running the tech and answering questions and monitoring the chat. It's been a great experience to delve into this with you today, and we look forward to seeing you in September. Take care, everyone.